Welcome. Welcome to our final press conference of the International Media Center, FC MC. I'm sure you're familiar with our procedure. 30 minutes, statements by the spokespeople on the podium, and afterwards, opportunity to ask questions. After that, you are welcome to request one-to-one interviews with FC MC Media Center is responsible for the independent reporting on the G20 summit. We've had local and international guests at our and who have been illuminating the events around the summit. We're very, very glad that there was a wide range of perspectives. However, we have expressly stated every single day and once again that we are not necessarily associated with the views expressed on the podium. Our aim is to allow a channel for as many voices as possible and a reliable coverage of the summit. It is not a platform for political debate, and therefore we request that everybody in the audience respect this. To my left, our spokesperson, Emily LAQUER, Alliance for the Universal Demo Solidarity Without Borders, not G20. Welcome to Hell. Apologies from Welcome to Hell. They had to cancel at short notice. If you have questions to Welcome to Hell, email address g20-press.org. GABRIELE HEINECKE, Legal Aid, will hopefully join us in the... Then I have JENDRICK DEDOW from the Sea Rescue Service Seawatch. And then now a representative of the FC MC-organization, Oliver Leistert and MAREN GRIMM. Last but not least, SVEN, who is responsible for event management and security at FC Pauli. And now I welcome Emily LAQUER. Good morning, everybody. It's great that you managed to make it today, this morning. The demonstration, Solidarity Without Borders, is celebrating. We had almost 60,000 participants in the demonstration. We are so happy that so many people joined us yesterday, and you can see from the pictures how varied participants were. What the demonstration showed, that the event Hamburg zeigt Haltung, the autonomous was not so well attended as our event, only for 4,000 participants. And this showed that the true dissent towards the G20 politics was expressed by our peaceful demonstration, remained peaceful. That's the way it could have been on Thursday if the police had decided to take a different approach instead of escalating the situation. And the Black Bloc was welcome with us yesterday as an alliance partner. So the decision for whether escalation or de-escalation was really on the part of the police. We had numerous banned Kurdish demonstrators yesterday, and I was very, very pleased that we were able to show them solidarity. The demonstration experienced some obstacles. The police tried to stop the demonstration and to this is not the job of the police. And I issued a personal warning, and we had illegal action taken towards the protest camps. We had a demonstration that was completely broken up on Thursday. We had a legal battle over the freedom of assembly on the Heiligen Geistfeld. And this was really a violation of our freedom of assembly, that we could not all stand together because there was simply not room for everybody yesterday. Our comrades were prevented, some of them from coming to Hamburg, and some people from Italy were stopped at the border and were arrested and taken into custody. And we were quite shocked that our Italian visitors were treated in this way. Despite all this, and despite marginalization in the media, and despite, we are pleased that we still managed, despite everything, that we managed to have such a successful demonstration that we haven't seen in the last 30 years. We managed to through this friendship alliance and to reinforce our friendship alliance. In the protest alliance, we've discussed the events of the last few days, and we wish to express criticism, and we think it's wrong that residents of Hamburg have had their property damaged. That's not what we wanted. That's not part of our agreement for our protest alliance. I am personally very hurt that residents have had their trust violated by this violent behavior. And the left movement is part of political life in Hamburg, and we will have to enter into a dialogue, not just with them, but with everybody else who lives in Hamburg. We wanted to organize a protest of hope, and that does not mean burning cars. That means people who have stood against the occupation and the blocking by the authorities. Imagine that there's a ban on protest and nobody takes it seriously. So we understand that in the blocked zone, people showed courage, and it didn't matter how much people tried to clear us off. We did not allow our courage to be broken. Sometimes as an organizer, you ask yourself if everything has gone completely, people ask you if you've gone completely mad, and what did we think that we were doing? And we're still amazed by how many people joined us, and that our movement cannot be stopped, and that our fight will continue, and will continue in a European metropolis such as Hamburg. That was Emily LAQUER from the Alliance for Solidarity Without Borders, not G20. And now we're pleased to welcome a representative for the Emergency Legal Aid, GABRIELE HEINECKE. Thank you very much. Welcome, the Emergency Legal Aid. We've given another name to the so-called Festival of Democracy that this event was supposed to be. It's a festival of the violation of basic rights. Hamburg has taken the position of the police camp, and the ruling by the Senate, nobody should have their basic rights violated, but in fact, nobody should be in a zone which belongs to the police with armed vehicles. the right for freedom of assembly and personal safety was violated in a very extensive way. This started with the general injunction against demonstration, and this gave a symbol that to the population that the freedom of assembly as an essential, basic democratic right was not to be. Then you might remember the anti-capitalistic camp, and the National Constitutional Court had to be called to arrive at a general acceptance that the freedom of assembly should be guaranteed. After an express application to the local administration court that this camp in Entenwerder should be erected, the police reacted with violence and struck, and Mr. Dedow, the president of the police, declared himself personally responsible that the camp should not take place. At that time, that the anti-capitalist protesters were so discouraged that they gave up. Then during the demonstration of Welcome to Hell on July 6th, according to our observations, we were on the site and at the place where the demonstration started. There was an illegal action by the police, and we had to establish that the water cannon was used indiscriminately, and this represents an action that led to complete chaos, so that the demonstration, as it had been planned, could not continue, although it had started as a peaceful demonstration. And then it did manage to continue to the Sternbrücke, where it was stopped again. On the July 7th, there were many people in various neighborhoods of the city demonstrated peacefully, and all I can say is that the representatives of the legal aid service were there and established that the police acted inappropriately, and that freedom of assembly rights was violated by moving people from their spot. Freedom of assembly is free, and as long as the group of people protesting is peaceful. And people with masked faces should not be demonstrated. This rule should not eclipse the fact that the people who want to protect themselves from being identified, this is not enough to justify clearance. The route that was allocated to the protesters, that was so far away from the site of the conference G20, with regard to freedom of assembly and freedom of speech, people have shown people were not aware of the protest if they were within the G20 summit site. So to sum up, it was not a demonstration, it was not guaranteed freedom of assembly. For all our listeners here today, with a short interruption by we are in a football stadium, and we've been joined by some cheerful fans who are singing this morning. Live performance by some
diese Klänge schallen hier oft durchs Stadion. Wir hatten das große Privileg, in den letzten Tagen hier Pressekonferenzen abhalten zu können. Solange diese Gesänge noch laufen, hätten wir unterbrochen. Es war eigentlich ganz schön. Jetzt machen wir weiter.
So that was lovely. And now we continue with Gabriele. So that was the free expression of democratic rights. This is what we want. So back to several thousand, which was wonderful, but it was not at the point of where it should have been. In the Sternschanze neighborhood, and where there was violent behavior, the police did not strike. So this is also a point that needs to be clarified. So the experiences of the last few days for us should be a warning to us. And also the idea that a custody center was erected in Harburg is not within our idea. Within a shift of 8 hours, only 4 people could be interviewed by legal experts. This is also because the state prosecutor came with rather lame excuses about why people had been arrested. And this is completely untenuous. Papers were magicked that people had violated laws, that people had violated the peace. And under the section of outcome of the procedure, nothing, no evidence. We believe if Herr Scholz calls leaders of states and calls for violent people to receive very severe sentences, this is not our idea. Why should young people be reacting in this way? Why doesn't the city of Hamburg take these young people seriously? We call for an investigation to be opened. There's so much danger during this summit that civil democracy has been infringed in a radical way. What we heard yesterday, even journalists in the Schanze neighborhood with press card did not interest the police and were turned away.
GABRIELE HEINECKE vom Anwaltlichen Notdienst. Der nächste Beitrag kommt
Our next statement comes from JENDRICK DEDOW from the Sea Rescue Service Seawatch. Hello everybody, thank you very much for the invitation to join you this morning. A week ago, Seawatch put up a banner to open the beginning of the summit with a banner with bridges, not walls on it, and we had, in the course of the week, we had various protests against the inhumane policy that we have. We criticize the closing of borders against migrants. We are quite shocked that the delegates of the G20 summit did not arrive at an agreement on a solution for this refugee crisis. They could, in view of the means that they could make available, for example, the military ships from Frontex who are sent away from the zones where people are in the Mediterranean, we see this. This responsibility is not assumed for this crisis. We're a small organization, Seawatch. We've shown, even with not a lot of capacity, that we're still able to save a lot of people. But the G20 do not seem to be very interested to organize legal entry procedures. Instead, they're working on closing the borders to the European Union. We see that the Libyan Coast Guard are supported and that we as Sea-Watch have received a lot of criticism. We've been accused of violating various regulations for which there's no evidence. The Libyan Coast Guard is acting in a very strange way by doing things like threatening with weapons, shooting into the water, and storming the boats of the refugees, creating fear so that they jump into the water. And Sea-Watch had to really see people drowning because of negligent behavior, which should not occur in a humane rescue organization. We call NGOs have been confronted with a codex, but the NGOs have created their own code, ethical code, for guidelines, and in coordination with Rome, the Libyan Coast Guard seems to be acting in a very autonomously and without consulting anybody else. We've also recorded pictures that how the lives of refugees have been risked and threatened. We condemn the closing of borders, a policy that closes borders. The human right for security is completely ignored, although the G20 is to a great extent responsible for this situation, that people have ever fewer possibilities and options to live in peace and safety. And they simply haven't found a response for this situation. NGOs are ever more isolated, confronted with this problem. We try to find a solution. As I said at the beginning, we demand that there should be legal entry points and routes, and that we should have a maritime procedure that would not force people to risk their lives traveling across the desert and across the Mediterranean. This is why we came to the G20, to participate in the discourse, and we are happy that we're able to do this. Thank you, Jendrick Dedow from the Sea-Watch. Next up, representatives of the organizational team FC MC, Maren Grimm, filmmaker. Just very briefly, I've received the information that the sound is missing. Just a second. So, good morning, we continue. One thing is clear. This shop window modern police work must have consequences. We've experienced at the G20 summit many things that will preoccupy us for weeks to come, and the FC MC has planned an agenda, and we have achieved many of our aims. We succeeded in contributing to the voice of protest against the G20. We have contributed to the evaluation of events, and we will continue with this in the future. This was a political necessity. And we have shown that solidarity can replace financial means. This has become possible because so many people worked hard and joined us. Good morning from Oliver Leistert with some numbers. from over 1,000 accredited journalists. So nearly everybody turned up. 1/3 were media activists, freelancers. Journalists came from a dozen countries, from South Africa to Russia. All channels were represented, print, online, and TV. They had interviews with representatives, with social movements, and from NGOs. So this was integrated into our aims as FC MC. Journalists were able to process their material and were able to edit their articles. Several journalists joined representatives of the FC MC to go onto the streets to film what was going on. So we were able to, our outcome was pluralistic articles. Our motto and slogan was, in the face of madness, reinvent critical criticism in times of populism. And this has been our job. The FC MC has at least pushed the envelope and showed that the way out of the crisis in journalism has to be solved by the media creators themselves. So we have some sound problems. We need to change microphones. Maren Grimm. The collaboration with the political alliances and with the organizational committee went very well. Our press conferences symbolized this great collaboration, and we will continue with this work. We thank you so much to the FC St. Pauli to making it possible, to the Chaos Computer Club, did their very, very best and continue. That network and streaming worked well. Many individuals and small organizations helped us. Our security crews, for example, our catering crew from Mecklenburg, and served us beautifully with, and the coffee bar kept us all awake. The slogan of the football club, St. Pauli, "You'll never walk alone." We've really lived this slogan, and we can't say thank you enough.
Trotz des Hinweises, Beifallsbekundung zu unterlassen, machen wir jetzt weiter, passenderweise mit Sven BRUX, Leiter Veranstaltungen und Sicherheit.
Last but not least, Sven BRUX, event manager and security manager at St. Pauli. Good morning, everybody. And football crowds, of course, never do what they're told to. I can speak from experience. Last week was for us uncharted waters for us too as a football club. We have never done this kind of thing. We have the wide range of organizations at the G20 summit. We welcomed them all, and we had resisted a lot of pressure from outside, and we believe that freedom of opinion is very important, and we wanted to give people the possibility, the opportunity to express their views, or simply to stay overnight here if they were not able to do that elsewhere. We can give you a very positive conclusion. Unlike other bodies in this city, our expectations were fulfilled. Everything that we planned worked out really well. The collaboration was absolutely wonderful. We had, of course, single issues that we had the media center, we had the catering area, we had the football tournament with open air music the last few days, and then of course we had the very spontaneous overnight accommodation where 200 people stayed with us. It all started that nobody who came here was criminal. It was not my impression was that they were all very, very nice young people from very different countries. Nobody harmed or vandalized anything. They even picked up their cigarette butts and took them home with them. And thank you very much for that consideration to them. Also with the media center, I can say collaboration was wonderful. They respected everything that we asked for. And I'm so impressed by how varied the people are who came here. Worlds came together here, journalists, techies, nerds, ordinary football fans, catering, cooks, and whenever there was an issue, we all came together to help each other, and everybody's a volunteer here, and I was really impressed by this. Catering area next door gave out 5,000 meals. That's all with donations. But of course, my information is that the donations covered the costs. So where the 2 concerts and the tournament, this was a great idea, and it was really, and people entered into the spirit of this. And there was a sort of an open air festival, and people could just sit quietly and have a drink and have a conversation. We could see how people on an international level really came together and had a sort of peaceful time amid all the chaos. And so we're really pleased, despite everything that happened outside. We're happy, but we're also very proud that we were part of this event and showed us that we were right in our approach. With the only bad thing that happened was a bachelor party where of drunk guys that was a bit annoying. But that says everything, doesn't it? So now you can hear from the singing that our football normality has returned. But on the political level, when you see how many people come together from all over and to really get on well and join us in FC St. Pauli, this means that we can look into a bright future. We are also affected by the negative impact of globalization. We experience the weak members of society and the weak members of people of the economy, and we have tried to help them and try to support them, and we are pleased to welcome the FC MC at any time in the future. Flying exchange of microphones with audio issues, but on the last day, but we'll overcome these issues. Sven BRUX, thank you very much. Now we have time for questions. Many hands raised. Please keep your questions brief in view of the audio issues. 2 questions. One to Frau Heineckke, and if I am allowed, and one to Frau LAQUER. We're always very pleased when people talk about freedom of the press, and you spoke about attacks to journalists. I was affected in this way also, and also the violence of the police. I also saw that there were only very few arrests in the Schanzen neighborhood. And don't you think that many more people should have been caught in the Schanzen neighborhood? This is a question from the Taz newspaper.
gefragt, inwiefern nach dem, was an Bildern zu sehen war, nicht viel mehr Festnahmen hätten stattgefunden.
Shouldn't there have been more arrests according to the pictures that we saw of the Schanzen neighborhood? Gabriele Heineckke, Emergency Legal Aid. I don't know how many arrests there were in the Schanzen neighborhood. What I do know that is that we had 290 people in the interim custody center, and there will be more because the processing is very slow at the moment. About 50 of those people had come from a spontaneous demonstration in the Volkspark, Friday morning 6:30, and we're still there. So processing is very, very slow.
Entschuldigung, das war aber nicht meine Frage. Meine Frage war, müssten nicht in der Nacht der Krawalle im Schanzenviertel viel
But shouldn't there have been more people caught in the Sternschanze?
Gabriele Heineckke hätte es nicht in der Nacht der Krawalle, Zitat, viel mehr Verhaftungen geben müssen.
Du hast das jetzt schon übersetzt.
You have translated that, Siri.
Verknackt heißt ja verurteilt.
Verknackt means sentenced. We don't have any instant courts. Most of the procedures were express procedures, and people being sentenced in an express. This did not happen, to my knowledge. We have a lot of video material that needs to be evaluated, prevents this express procedure for processing people. Also, the police put all of the material on one server, so that currently the judges cannot access this material, although it could excuse people from being sent. May I ask a supplementary question to Frau LAQUER?
Wenn ich vielleicht noch eine Frage stellen dürfte an Frau LAQUER und dann lasse ich natürlich auch alle anderen Kollegen zu Wort kommen. Ich habe ja schon einige drollige Pressekonferenzen
I have experienced a few strange press conferences during the summit, one with the block protesters, that they had a different idea of what would happen. They had other expectations. You expressed in concrete terms what you experienced, what Hamburg residents experienced, and that they had their cars set fire to. Could you give us an estimation as a contrasting narrative? This were some of the worst riots that we've experienced in Germany. So, do you believe in a political analysis that the riots in the Schanzen neighborhood and all over the town, is this part of the progressive left? And if not the progressive left, then the radical links? Does this advance the cause of the left in Germany? How far do nocturnal events, how will they influence the left across Germany? Yeah. So I think in an analysis one has to say that the situation of Friday evening, that was nothing to do with Block G20. Block G20 finished at 6 p.m., 7 p.m. It was not the part of the universal demonstration this week. At the same time, people were lost for words, how fascistic and how dramatic, and do not participate in these emotional adjectives that were. We need to be more cautious and careful, and how people take part in this dialogue, and we mustn't forget on which side of the fence we are standing. There were a wide range of different actors during that night, and I wouldn't understand it as a political project. This is not our agenda. And many people, authorities, complained that there were spectators who started shouting, "This is our city." And people in the city have the feeling that the police pushed something through that they didn't want, and that the safety of dictators at the summit were more important than our security here locally. People feel that there's a necessity to defend democracy in a rebellious way because of the escalation approach taken by the police. Nothing comes from nothing, you might say. We requested the police to stop their escalation approach and responsibility for what happened. We're not going to accept that responsibility as the alliances that organized peaceful civil disobedience. So the question is, what is left behind? What is the result? And we believe that we don't accept the madness going on in the world. After the summit, oh, it's over already, and it wasn't so bad. And the consequence is that we won't have a summit in the Western world. We won't see such a summit held in a European metropolis again. We won't accept responsibility for the violent behavior. And that is, I have to evaluate and establish that people are afraid of being pushed around, and they are prepared to fight for their political rights on the streets. We must not accept the attack on our basic rights, and we do have the option and the possibility of resisting. Emily LAQUER. Next question, please. Please ask your question. Very briefly, I'm Martina, and I've lived for many years in the Hafenstraße. Do you have numbers of injured people? Does anybody know how many injured people we have? We as residents and from people of the St. Pauli neighborhood, all night, the last few days, have heard rumors about injured people, people who have lost their sight, for example. We don't know what's true and we don't know what's not true. The question, I've understood the question. This article is... Okay, the question is, we must unfortunately adhere to the rules that we agreed. Does anybody on the podium have numbers about injured people? Who can answer the question? Maren Grimm. We can't give you any exact figures. There are many reports of verified serious injuries, a wide range of injuries, but we don't have any exact figures for you. Christoph Twickel for Die Zeit newspaper. First question for Herr BRUX. I've heard that in response to the announcements that St. Pauli allowed 200 people to stay overnight and that the Minister of Internal Affairs complained about this. Is there anything in that report? And the second thing I want to ask you is that we read and see in the media an estimation that seems to suggest that there was a mistake with regard to the infrastructure to allow this to happen. This is directed to people in churches, but also directed to the FC St. Pauli. Do you think that you contributed to escalation of the situation or de-escalation of the situation? Herr Brux, was there a complaint by the Ministry of Internal Affairs that people were allowed to stay overnight at St. Pauli? We were, of course, in constant contact with the Ministry for Internal Affairs when the camp was cleared. There were some phone calls, and we made clear why we decided to allow people to stay here. We don't have to agree, but it wasn't particularly a confrontational phone call. It didn't change our attitude, and it didn't change our mind. Second question that you ask, the criticisms. We have also heard these criticisms that people who opened their homes were offering safe haven to criminals or violent people. Our experience is just simply that the people who stayed with us were young people without a lot of money in their pockets, who simply had no place to stay, and so there has to be a possibility for these people to have a roof over their heads. And if they can't stay on fields that are normally used for open-air festivals and rock concerts, then we believe this is an obstacle. And so this was our small contribution to offer these people accommodation here in the football club. Of course, one of the people who stayed here may have been a criminal. How shall we do that? Anybody is a potential rioter. So the question is running up the garden path. So I can only say that the 250 people next door, none of them were high, none of them behaved badly. It was not our impression that anybody there was doing anything wrong. This was simply an overnight accommodation, and so they were able to, in this way, we are sure that we contributed to the de-escalation of the situation in this way. Next question, Sena Schulz, freelance journalist. Question to Oliver Leistert and Maren Grimm. You both, in your opening statement, you referred to the FC MC Media Center and described that yourselves as an organization that reinvents critical media. Could you please say something more about this how far this was achieved in the last few days? So the slogan that we use here is in the face of, we created a platform for exchange among the different journalists and also media activists and bloggers and Twitters. And this created a very unique atmosphere in the recent days. We have had debates here that will have contributed to a different kind of content, to a more pluralistic coverage of the summit itself, and not just the protests. And because there were many people here from different countries, that different levels of awareness and knowledge about Hamburg were shared. At the same time, of course, the slogan "Reinvent Critical Journalism" was achieved and practiced because we have a wonderful technical equipment, and this was made possible by all the people next door who were responsible for subtitles, editing, a very wide range of video, audio, and photographers, experts from. And so this was a product, a collective product, that we will continue to process, and we are looking forward to working with it, and encourages us to do this in future. More questions? Peter Att. He's a freelance filmmaker, and question to Jendrick Dedow. I want to ask you more about the state of emergency. So according to my information, that there is an international law of sea rescue. According to what you said, it seems that this right or this duty to rescue people, that this has been infringed and violated and militarized. Could you say something about this? Yes, there is a fundamental law, a duty to rescue people when people get into trouble on the sea. And the refugees' boats are not seaworthy. And so, of course, these people are from day one in danger. As I said in my statement, we see that our work is being blocked and prevented. This is political and in a physical way. When the Libyan Coast Guard, with support, disrupts our rescue action and stops us from doing what we want to do, and then behave in such a negligent way that people fall into the water and drown, and thus prevent people from being rescued. But on the political level, we are blocked also through the rethink by the Italian government to allow refugee boats onto shore. So we see this, our code, our guidelines as violated, and the international code and guidelines needs to be better coordinated. While on the other hand, Libyan Coast Guard is responsible for drownings at sea. Next question, please. Alexander Schröder, online magazine Perspektive. I have, you, as a representative of the civil society, have you thought about how repression by the police can be prevented at similar summits in future? Are there thoughts or checks and balances that we could implement, or other ideas? Who is your question directed to, please? I direct my question to Gabriele Heineckke from the Legal Aid Service. I'm speaking for the Legal Aid Service. No, we haven't thought about this so far, but we are absolutely convinced that it's to do with the political atmosphere, whether the police are prevented from repressive approaches or not. And if our basic rights are violated or taken from us, this all are called to behave in the appropriate way and to take the appropriate steps.
Eine nächste Frage.
Ja, guten Morgen, Alexander Josefowitsch, Hamburger Abendblatt. Meine Frage geht an Frau LAQUER.
Hamburger Abendblatt, Frau LAQUER, you implied at least that in addition to that the violent behavior was not, the perpetrators were not people from Hamburg, and that you are not solidarizing with this kind of behavior. Emily LAQUER. No, I was not personally there. The left-wing organization of which I'm a member was in the middle of a protest more or less the entire time. We had a universal demonstration on Saturday, and I wasn't anywhere near where the violence happened, so I don't know any more than what has been reported already. I can promise you that we will be giving statements on this in the future, and we will be. But then why do you maintain that the perpetrators were not from Hamburg and that residents were solidarizing with protest? So no matter, I'm not going to be put under pressure. We will be issuing statements in future, but that we were, at the time that this violence took place, we were in the middle of our own protest. And we are not political advisors. We do all of this as volunteers. So please be patient, and we will be issuing statements at the appropriate time in the future. The last few nights I've seen journalists, accredited journalists, bleeding from the head, coming away from, so there were other views and estimations why the police acted in the way they did. No, says Gabriele Heineckke from the Legal Aid Service.
Die nächste Frage. Gibt es noch Fragen? Ich sehe eine, ja?
Hallo,
Ralf Futter, online magazine, the Union of Journalists. Thank you very much to FC St. Pauli for this platform. My question is associated with the colleague from the TATS and from Radio Kovacs. I interpret things this way. One colleague was injured, other people were sentenced, or there were at least people arrested and taken into custody. My impression, I cannot explain the behavior of the police, which was very hesitant last night. They could have put out fires, and I find it all a bit suspicious in the view of the press reports that we did not experience. This is not in keeping with the approach taken by the police beforehand. So, is there anybody who can tell me why all of a sudden the police acted so hesitantly? I'd like to offer an example, which was residents from the Max Brauer Allee, that young people tried to set the petrol station on fire, and they went over and started talking to the young people to stop them doing it. And that's it. So we're amazed that police have no compunction about behaving violently towards individuals without talking to people and before them. So we've experienced a lot of police officers in the Schanzen neighborhood, and we're convinced that a lot of things could have been prevented. So it's a question why the police officers did not take more preventative measures. This entire mission by the police, we think, should be investigated by an independent investigator, because it is our view that, in fact, what happened in the Schanzen neighborhood is a sign that of democratic rights being violated, but also, and perhaps everything that happened is also part of the getting the gentrification of the neighborhood through quicker. MAREN GRIMM. One of the reasons why we decided to set up this media center was that in recent months, or the last 6 months, observed that the politicians in charge of this city and in conjunction with various representatives of the media created a scenario which partly was realized over the last few days. One of our motivations was, and now and retrospectively we can say, that is to, in a way, take a political action against this scenario. We will make every effort to, in the next few weeks, to respond to your question. I'll try to sum up. This is a dramatization, pre-prepared dramatization, and the script was already written before the airplanes carrying the leaders of states had landed.
Ja. Hallo, guten Tag. Ich bin Adi Wiegit von Online-Zeitung Europa Postal.
Online newspaper Europa Postal. Question to Gabriele Heineckke. I had my accreditation withdrawn. Friday I was able to cover the events, but and a so-called head of asked me to go into a closed room and simply took my card away. I asked why, what my accreditation was being withdrawn, and he said, and this was an order from the Hamburg Criminal Investigative Police, BKK. And you're covering the G20 summit, is that correct? Yes, we experienced these measures. These are extremely illegal. So this is already assuming that the behavior of the member of the press is justified. So we took this to court, and I would advise you to go to court and to lodge a lawsuit in an express procedure with our local courts. Next question. So I now close the final press conference of the Independent Media Center, FC MC. Our thanks to the guests on the podium. Our thanks to members of the press for your interest in the last few days. Many thanks to those who have been covering us and listeners in live stream. Only thing I have left to say, we are pleased that we were able to provide this platform for as a productive exchange as possible, and we wish you all the best.